Good afternoon, and thank you much for joining us today for our webinar on the 6 megatrends in LatAm payments. My name is Abel Delgado. I am the Digital Marketing Director for America's Market Intelligence, and I'm going to be serving as one of the moderators here today for the event. So before we get started, we just want to give you a quick overview of what to expect. Basically, we're going to have about 50 minutes or so of presentation and then 10 minutes for questions. You can ask questions, though, at any point in time. You don't have to wait. Basically, the way to do that is if you look at your screen, you see sort of a black band towards the bottom, and one of the icons that's found there is Q&A. If you click on that, it brings up a window. You can type in your question and then send it to us, and we'll address them all at the end of the webinar as much as we possibly can. All right, so let's move on here to our legal notice. I'm not going to read it out because it would take too long. We really want to get to our material, but I encourage you to read it at your leisure. It basically covers our liabilities in terms of the information that's presented here today. We do not assume any responsibility for any business decisions made using the information here today. That's the biggest takeaway of all. So let's move on now to introduce our speakers. I'm going to actually turn the floor over to them to allow them to introduce themselves one by one. So by all means, folks, let's say hi.
Thank you, Abel. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome. My name is Lindsay Lehr. I lead the AMI payments practice. This is our first official event of the year, so we're excited to kick off with the analysis of these 6 megatrends. And I'm joined by 2 team members, Marina and Ignacio, and I'll let them say hello as well.
Hi, sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Marina Gil. I am part of AMI payments team. I represent the company here in Brazil, and it's a pleasure to have you here. Hopefully you have fun and enjoy our content. Thank you.
Hi, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Ignacio Carvalho, and I am AMI Payment Practice Southern Cone affiliate. We'll be speaking a little bit about the Argentinian case and some thoughts around LatAm as well. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, folks. Great to have such a good panel here on board. So let's get started. Let's talk about trends. So for this, I'm going to turn the floor over to Lindsay, that's going to give us a general overview of the 6 megatrends that we're observing in payments in Latin America. Lindsay.
Okay, great. So thanks, Abel. Let's take a look at our 6 megatrends. Guys, this is our second annual megatrends event. We had last year in January, we started off the year with these 6 brilliant megatrends we were so excited to present to you. And of course, 2 months later, everything became drastically different. We had a 2020 like no one expected. And so we have reoriented, regrouped, and reassessed what we think 2021 will look like. So real quickly, we're going to cover all of these trends very quickly in today's session. Each one of these deserves their own webinar. But real quick, let's look at a high level what we'll be talking about today. Disappearance of the unbanked. Now, disappearance is a strong word. We use it on purpose, and we'll get into that a little bit more. Instant payments displacing cash. Debit cards becoming top of wallet. The rising dominance of contactless, both cards and NFC mobile. Banking as a service and fintech as a service as a particular use case of open banking. And finally, the mass digitization of small businesses. So let's dive into our first trend. And Ignacio and Marina are going to jump in when we have content particularly pertinent to the regions they represent. And then again, we'll have an open discussion towards the end. So disappearance of the unbanked. What do we mean by that? First of all, let's look at some key enabling factors to mobile digital services in Latin America. The first thing to keep in mind, what we want to do first of all today is just update you all on the numbers. We had such a disruptive year last year. We want to really ground ourselves in the data. So first of all, where is smartphone penetration? Smartphone penetration is the #1 enabler of any type of digital participation. And we're really pleased to see that smartphone penetration has truly reached deep penetration levels. In Brazil, 90% of adults are already using a smartphone. Most of the data that you'll see published tracks smartphone penetration of overall devices. And so you'll typically see numbers that tend to be lower because there are many people have more than one smartphone. Many people have more than one cell phone, and not all of them are smartphones. But when we look at actual individuals, penetration has reached over 80% in the entire region. So that means that we're very well prepared to access the population with digital financial services and digital services in general. When we take a look at banking penetration, this is where things also are looking much improved over past years. Okay, so first we have smartphone penetration, which is always higher than banking penetration. But banking penetration is really where we need to be looking carefully to see how enabled is our region to adopt financial services. And we can see a real tangible increase in improvement since 2017, which is when the last World Bank data became, widely recognized as the most reliable source. Was the latest available data is from 2017, and it also does not include bankerization from fintechs and wallets, companies that are not technically financial institutions. So what we did at AMI was look at that data, look at growth of traditional banking, look at the penetration of digital banks and fintechs and wallets to make some estimates, looking at what 2020 looks like. And what we see, Brazil especially has made incredible strides in many ways, thanks to government social benefits payouts that we'll look at a little bit later. And other, Chile is also very high up there. So we're really getting into the upper echelons of penetration. Some other markets still have a long way to go, like Mexico, for example. And we can also see that traditional banks still hold the bulk of this penetration. But digital banks and fintechs have also made huge strides. There's a lot of overlap there. A lot of people who have traditional banks also work with fintechs. But when we're thinking about bringing in new folks, it's mostly been the fintechs and the wallets. And so on average, we can say 70% of the population is now have access to some type of digital account. Great. So on this slide, when we look at, who are the key players, right? Again, we're always talking about updating these numbers so that we feel really grounded in the data. Again, these digital players have made a lot of progress in expanding banking beyond the traditional core. So let's look at who some of these players are. And as a reminder, all you guys for being with us today, you'll receive this deck. So no need to take photos or take a lot of notes. You're going to get a copy of this with all the data. But of course, we see the big players, right? Nubank, Mercado Pago, the usual suspects. PicPay here has soared past 40 million users, especially because of their partnership with the government to pay out social benefits during the COVID crisis. So you can see how heavily dispersed these guys are in Brazil. And where Brazil has really taken off from the rest of the region in terms of penetration, digitization of the overall population. But one thing, if we go to the next slide, we can really look at what does this mean going forward. This is really setting the foundation for all of the other trends. And what's very important to keep in mind is we're at 70% banking penetration right now, but that does not mean access is not the same as usage. Access, we've pretty much established a very good baseline for access, except for folks located in very, very rural areas and folks who are above the age of 65, 70, who are most likely not going to change their technology habits. Beyond those two groups, we really have access well established. But what's missing is quality usage. So, tools that we really need to ensure that usage continues to accelerate throughout the year, carefully curated and targeted user journeys that add value to users throughout their life cycle. This is what the fintechs are working on very hard. And this is where traditional banks are trying to understand, how do I add value to these new users coming into my ecosystem? Who could potentially lose? Nowadays, almost every player out there has enabled instant onboarding with no physical steps required. In the era of COVID, in this digital era that we're in, requiring anyone to go to a branch or even make a phone call all now puts you behind the curve. So thinking about all the technologies that enable seamless digital onboarding, and from there, a seamless digital interaction process will be, critical to being seen as an innovative and digital player that will add value to customers' lives on a regular basis. All right, so trend number 2, we have some key data down, some updates on where we're at as a region. Now let's look at what's actually going on with some of the regulation and the players that are in the region with instant payments. I started to say last year that we think 2021 will be the year of instant payments in Latin America. It's been gearing up a little bit year after year. And at the end of 2020, we really started to see it explode with two key platforms. The first one being Pix in Brazil. Brazil's central bank's real-time payments platform, which launched in November. This has been highly anticipated, and I know probably everyone on the call has a million questions about Pix. We're going to present some key data, but the overall takeaway from Pix, only after a couple months of operation, is that Brazilians have been highly willing and interested in experimenting with it. And we're seeing Pix displace cash more so than any other payment method. In December 2020, Pix amassed more than 23 billion in transactions, already exceeding the average monthly credit card spend in 2020. So pretty outstanding results when we think about other similar platforms that have been launched in other countries and pretty much fallen flat. The other platform that is very noteworthy is in a very different market of Peru, and that will be Yape from Banco de Crédito de Peru, BCP, the country's largest bank. Yape was launched about 2 to 3 years ago and quickly has geared up and now has reached almost 50% of Peru's banked population, which is really outstanding in a country that has of the lowest banking penetration, the highest levels of cash, and is a little bit behind in the fintech evolution. Already 500,000 merchants are accepting Yape as a payment method. And one thing that has really helped Yape take off is the fact that so far there's no major competition from other wallets or fintechs, which has enabled Yape to get ahead of the curve and start serving this latent demand. So we'll have Marina tell us a little bit more about Pix in detail.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Lindsay, for the overview. So the idea here is just to present Pix in high numbers so we can have an idea of how impressive are the acceptance of Pix in the first months since the launch back in November last year. So if we see there, we already have 133 and plus million chaves registered, and chaves, just to put everyone on the same page, is the nickname central bank created to define the bank details, the account details of all the users of Pix. You have to register and choose a nickname called chave. So we have around more than 133 million chaves already registered. And if you go to the number of users, we have more than 55 million users in the Pix system. This is because each user can register more than one chave. So that's why we have this difference, but it's still this 55 million number is really high, and it shows something around 35% of the Brazilian banked population. So in only 3 months, we have such a huge adherence of Pix. Other important thing to say is how Pix is being used up to now, right? And the most of the transactions, 46%, is used by P2P transactions, person to person. What calls our attention here is this 37% of B2B transactions, meaning that the business are still already using Pix to transact with other business. What is not that yet representative is the business to person and person to business. But within the same group, the rates are really high. One thing we have here in the bottom, it's just a relation, Lindsay already said about the TEDs and Pix. What's happening, we are seeing, is that Pix is not really competing against TEDs, since the TEDs volumes are still really high. What is happening is that probably Pix is replacing boletos and cash mainly. And this is an interesting trend to see happening here in Brazil. This is
Marina, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you quickly tell us what TEDs is? Someone just asked. I'm sure other people on the call aren't familiar.
So yeah, sure. This is the electronic transfer method we have here in Brazil to make transfers among accounts from different banks or inside banks. It was TEDs is normally compensated in the same day, but it's not available during the weekends nor different from the commercial hours, the banking hours. This is the main difference, except apart from the total different user experience, TED is only available during the daytime, the commercial hours, and business day. And while Pix is 24 hours, 7 days a week. That's the most difference, and the cost as well. Is it clear?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
No, good. So going to the next slide, I just wanna, this is an overview of Pix, and we are really monitoring to see what will come and how Pix will evolve. But what we have here is just to showcase three main trends we are seeing with Pix is that Pix is really replacing boletos. And when we say that, boletos is a specific voucher payment that we have here in Brazil. And we have two main usage of Pix replacing boletos. One is the neobanks, that the main cashing methods for those banks were boletos, because account holders had to pay a boleto to cash into the neobank's account, and also e-commerce, because for those that doesn't have cards, the only option up to now, the most common was boleto, and now users without cards can also purchase online with Pix. And it's, as I said, even during the weekends, holidays, so it's really an enhance in the experience. If you compare that to boletos. Also, what we see is like Pix will probably help a lot the unbanked getting into the journey of bancarization, because it's easy, it's a seamless transaction you can do using the mobile phone, the mobile number, for example. So it's something that will really help the consumer's journey, the new banked population that we have, like a massive number of them here in Brazil, especially after last year, the COVID. And the last interesting fact is how can the battle, we call it the battle between Pix and debit cards in the POS. And we have people here saying in Brazil that we are gonna start getting questioned in the cashiers if you wanna pay with credit card, debit card, or Pix, because this is something that will become more natural over time. But what we see is like debit is still more safer and more simpler to the merchants, because some services still need to be better defined related to the merchants to use Pix. And we can have more information about this in the next slide, more insights about this battle. Can we go there about, thank you. That's great. So what we see here is like individuals are really using Pix and willing to do that. That explains the huge amounts of transactions Lindsay mentioned earlier today. But when you go to the merchants, what we see is like almost all are still waiting to see what's going to happen, you know. And this is because Pix still needs to define some rules of the game for them, such as the final fees applicable to the merchants. They will probably compare that against the MDRs from the cards to see if it makes sense for them to adapt Pix or to promote it or not. Really, this is how merchants will define and how they will promote among all the payment methods that are existing here in Brazil, how we'll see Pix being promoted. It will depend on those kind of definitions, and also related to the claims and to the returns, refunds. It's still not clear how it will happen with Pix, because it's an instant payment. Once it's done, it's done. It's different from cards, where merchants have the liability sheets, they can define that, and also you have the compensation time to make any requests and any fraud investigation. What we see is like central bank is already working on that, and they are trying to include mechanisms such as the timer, that now, for example, if the banks and the institutions realize and notice it's a suspected transaction, probably it's a fraud, they can hold the transaction for 30 minutes or 60 minutes to really analyze that prior to allow and complete the transaction, because once it's completed, it's still not clear how this could be replaced, or any claim could be completed because the funds would be already in the possession of the other party. So this is something to see. And what we have here that is really interesting, it's the ride railing app that we interviewed here in Brazil, that mentioned that For now, they do not expect to incorporate Pix because they will keep using credit and debit cards. So this really emphasizes that some companies and merchants are really waiting to see, because especially for high railing, when you go Pix replacing cash, it's totally a different user experience and it adds value. But when you go to someone that has a card, it's not that difference. There is not a really value added and not an enhanced client experience. So we see those kind of behavior of players in ride hailing and other merchants because they have to understand like their customers and where the cash will be really replaced. And in this case, Pix could be more interesting and should be more promoted, right? So this is what we have for Pix up to now, but we will keep monitoring. And as far as we can see here in Brazil, this is like everyone has the eyes and Pix for this year. And of course, we'll keep monitoring that.
Thanks, Marina. I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions about Pix, so feel free to put them in the chat. Let's go to the next slide to take a look, another look at Yape in Peru. Now, the reason that part of there are several ingredients that have made Yape totally different system, right? Pix is pushed by the central bank. Yape is a private initiative from one bank. And some of the ingredients for why Yape has been successful in Peru, you have an issuer with a high market share and already very strong brand recognition. So deep penetration already within the market, a low penetration of fintech and other wallets, limited bank interoperability. Again, when banks are not working together, you're less likely going to have the type of situation that you do with Pix. And again, an underserved digitized population that's waiting for a digital solution. So these are just some of the ingredients that have made Yape kind of jump to the head of the pack and start to really cannibalize cash. And in this map here, we can see where we think the Yape model really has great potential in smaller markets where you have a strong leading bank and not too many fintech solutions out there already. So you'll see this in smaller markets, Central America, etc. I want to ask Ignacio, if you can tell us, what do you see? How do you see instant payments playing out in Argentina? It's still early days, but which direction do you see it going down?
Yes, thanks, Lindsay, and you all can call me Nacho. This is such an interesting trend because from behind, and I am reading your question, and we must know and take in our scope that a sub-trend of this trend is specifically who is gonna be pushing this instant payment infrastructure. So who is gonna be the owner of the pipelines or whatever you want to call it. Here in Argentina, we have launched very late on December some kind of Pix or of Spain, Mexico, which is called Transferencias 3.0. Unfortunately, I do not have so many data as we have already shown you from Pix, because from December to today, it has been a very short time. But what we have seen is that sub-trend that I have already said to you. So we have received some critics from the card brands, and we have received also some different. We have detected some issues from the non-bank networks. The thing from behind this is that even we get the instant payment, the infrastructure will be pushed by the brands and by the merchants. So that's the question which is on the air now in Argentina. We have a lot of expectations in this 2021 in the impact of Transferencias 3.0, and hopefully also the interoperability of the QR code will be a revolution for the retail payments in this country.
Perfect, Nacho. Thank you so much. So let's dive into our next trend. This is one that's fascinating because we get to look at the breakdown of payment methods in all across both in-store payments and e-commerce. So debit becoming top of wallet. What we saw during 2020 was a massive increase in the use of debit cards, credit cards going down, and also, the suspected use of cash going down. And however, what we realized in doing this analysis was that while cash seemed to really go down, that was mostly related to the fact that everyone was spending less. Consumption in general went down. But when we look at 2020, doing this analysis, retail spend in 2020, the breakdown between all of these payment methods, I know you guys are going to want this data, and this is very important for everyone to understand, is that cash still, even after all of 2020, is still representing about 75% of retail spend in person on average. Now, some markets, you see it going down to 65% in Brazil. Other markets, it's still quite high. So cash did not decline relative to other payment methods. It didn't decline as much as we thought it might. And we see that debit in 2020 in retail spend actually exceeded credit cards in the region, which is, the first time that this has happened. On the next slide, we can see how these growth rates really play out. And so overall retail, you have to kind of think from a baseline of overall retail spend falling 18% in 2020. But look at the comparative growth rates. Credit fell the most because people are spending less on high ticket items and focusing their expenditure on daily essentials, groceries, gas, pharmacy, everyday types of expenses. So credit fell the most, followed by cash, and debit fell. Debit almost maintained stable despite an overall decline of 18%. So this is the disruption that we can really see it. When we look at the penetration rates of each payment method between 2019 and 2020, cash lost 2% share, while debit gained 3% share. So not the massive disruption we heard a lot of us talking about last year, but a step in the right direction. And most importantly, debit really gained some important ground. On the next slide, we can see what...
Yes, sorry, Lindsay. No,
thank you. Go right ahead, Nacho.
I just want to do a comment about that, because this is, again, this is a fundamental point. And here in Argentina, we have a very concrete example between what is a rational analysis show based on official data and what is what the official agencies say based on private data. So, for example, on July, we have information about an increase in the cash transaction in Argentina, which was more than the 90%. So on the rational view, we are still speaking about 67%, but when we go to the private data of public agency, what we see is 90%. And what we can find from behind this is that during the 2020, and this is very important, we have had different cycles of using cash. So I think it was in July, August, the last quarter, of course, was very different. And in the aggregate, we for sure have seen not such a relevant decline on cash in this data that we are showing to the audience.
Perfect. I see Alex here asking, why is it that we think credit fell and debit really maintained its position? Does it have something to do with people not wanting to take on debt? That's absolutely right. First of all, big ticket items went out the window. Second of all, in such a climate of economic uncertainty, people losing their jobs, people getting laid off, wages declining, and complete economic disruption, that is when people don't want to take on debt. We'll see credit cards start to recover this year, but it's still a year of uncertainty and economic, stability. So we see debit really maintaining its position this year. On the next slide, we can see what this looks like. Of course, e-commerce is different than face-to-face retail. These numbers we calculated at the end of 2020. And so we're currently in the process of updating them. And this data will be available at the end of Q1, full year, a true look at 2020. This is based on forecasts from last year. But e-commerce in 2020 grew about 8%. That is really remarkable considering that the entire economy across the region fell between 8 and 9%, and retail overall fell almost 20%. Now, it didn't grow more because the travel industry was completely wiped out. And again, everyone is spending less. So we saw some real winners in digital goods and some retail categories, but overall about 8% growth. We expect e-commerce to continue growing 15% through 2023. And you can see how the different countries look on this graph. But again, on the next slide, what is really interesting to notice is, again, that debit really was the star in e-commerce. And this is for many reasons. E-commerce has been low in a lot of markets, particularly Brazil, where it's been limited and disabled by banks. Slowly, banks are starting to open up debit for e-commerce, and consumers are getting more used to thinking about using debit online.
Yeah, and Lindsay, if I may add, I think it's really important to mention that Caixa, which is the paying agent for the government subsidies here in Brazil, offered virtual debit cards for all consumers. So this really brought a lot of newly customers to the e-commerce platform, and also the merchants and acquirers here in Brazil. They really accelerated the process and were able to accept debit for virtual and online purchase really quick. So this really showed, I think it was really a big difference here in Brazil to start the acceptance of debit cards and to but to help and support this, what that you're saying, that debit is gaining traction in the e-commerce as well.
Perfect. Excellent. So let's continue on. Finally, when we think about, what does this mean and why do we need to pay attention to debit? A couple of things to keep in mind. To continue, issuers who are willing to enable debit cards for international and online purchasing will be able to take advantage of this trend. Also, issuers who embrace 3D Secure 2.0, I'm not going to go into the details of that, but a security standard for card payments online to maximize frictionless payments, and will also, the more debit can be enabled for that, the better chance you'll have at your transactions being authorized, and your customers, your debit customers who may be new to e-commerce, having a successful first experience when purchasing online. Again, those who are going to lose out are issuers who may have a poor online debit experience. For face-to-face payments, issuers who haven't enabled debit contactless payments, we'll look at the contactless trend in just a moment. And anyone who is focusing on closed loop wallets that are not riding on debit or credit card rails. We really see, even though we're having a lot of disruptive alternative payment methods launched, we really see the trend continuing and accelerating along card rails. And we'll take another look at that in the next trend. The rise of the dominance of contactless payments. This is a hot button topic. I know it's relevant to a lot of folks. So let's look at the numbers. Both contactless cards and mobile NFC fall into this category. And contactless has been ramping up slowly over the past couple of years. And we're starting, one of the biggest impacts of the pandemic wasn't on the use of the payment methods so much as it was the form factor and what technology you're using at the POS. And we really saw contactless receive a huge boost during the pandemic for safety reasons, people wanting to limit contact and make the most frictionless payment as possible. So according to public data that is available, press releases, central bank information, and our own interviews, these are our estimated penetration rates for contactless of face-to-face payment volume in 2020. You can see that Brazil's still quite low, but that has increased from 1 or 2%. The real stars of the region are Chile and Costa Rica. Argentina, Colombia, and Mexico are still kind of question marks, ramping up. And the other surprising thing is Peru has advanced quite a bit. And when we look at overall penetration of contactless cards, debit has jumped ahead of credit, and about 30%, 29% of credit card holders have a contactless credit card. So again, we're starting to see this critical mass that is really what's needed to unleash contactless payments. On the next slide, we'll see, how does this look in terms of volume? So Chile, right? Chile doesn't tend to come in first very often because of its size, but it is actually first when we look at contactless volume. Brazil, even though it's only at 5% penetration, because of its huge spend, we see a decent expenditure in Brazil. And from our conversations with issuers, we understand that about between 20 to 30% of all contactless spend is actually made using a mobile device. And Brazil is the market where mobile NFC has really started to have a relevant market share. And what we have learned is that the determining factor of whether contactless takes off or not is really issuers' willingness to promote it. The acquiring infrastructure is already in place in almost every market. And once that happens, it's really up to the issuers to decide, am I going to issue contactless cards and am I going to promote them? And in markets where it has been promoted, namely Chile and Costa Rica, it's starting to really make a difference in people's daily lives. And now the big question I get all the time, is it going to be contactless or is it going to be QR? So let's look at these two in comparison on the next slide. Now there's so much buzz about QR, right? Pix, Kodi, all of the private QR code ecosystems that are being launched, almost everyone has a QR code. But when we look at the numbers, there isn't that much public data on QR code volumes, but we are able to access volumes reported in Argentina and Mexico. And so when we look at the actual volumes in 2020 of QR code, it's tiny compared to contactless, which is already small compared to the total volume of credit and debit cards. So this hopefully puts things in a little bit of perspective and helps you understand, if you have to make a choice, where are you going to place your bets? QR code will have a market. It will have a niche for certain use cases and for certain segments of the population. But overall, when we're thinking broad strokes, our prediction is that contactless will eventually, gain a majority of card spend in the region. So on the next slide, another question that comes up related to this topic is, what about all the private wallets, right? Retailers launching their own wallets, wanting to become a payment method. What we say about this, we see more and more different technologies and wallets popping up. What we predict to happen is that wallets like FPay that was recently launched from Falabella, Magalu, others, they will continue to ride, they continue to be an instrument for engagement, but they'll continue to ride primarily on top of card rails. We do not see a closed loop system gaining dominance in the market. Again, this could vary from country to country, but overall, that's the trend that we predict. At the same time, we see some banks, for example, Banco Inter in Brazil, kind of going in the opposite direction, moving towards becoming a shopping marketplace and a shopping outlet, and not so much trying to create their own payment method. So again, we see credit and debit really maintaining their dominance, and it's really a question of which form factor and which credential will get lodged in those wallets, and that's where the competition comes down to.
And Lindsay, I think it's a good point to add that Pix has up to now some features in place, but they have like a roadmap of new features and capabilities to be implemented. And one of them is the possibility of making withdrawals using QR codes within Pix. And this will be done by the retailers at in-store. So this also supports this that you were presenting about Magalu and the merchants and huge stores offering banking products. And the trend is that it will be even more emphasized and supported by the central bank here, for example, if this becomes true with Pix.
Very interesting. Thank you. Okay, so on the next slide, we're going to talk about now banking as a service and open banking. This moves us a little bit away from payment methods and a little bit more into infrastructure, right? So what's happening with open banking? On the next slide, we can see this timeline. I know the text is very small. Again, you guys will get a copy of this deck. But we have active open banking regulation being implemented in Brazil and Mexico. Brazil is a little bit more advanced, already moving into phase 2. And hopefully by the end of this year, the idea is completing the process, moving all the way through phase 4. Mexico is in an earlier phase, still figuring out secondary regulations. So, but this is the framework that's created on paper. What does it look like in practice? You know, when we talk to issuers, regulators, fintechs, and all of the ecosystem that makes up open banking, we get a lot of mixed messages. We understand that financial institutions have a lot of alternative priorities that are taking away energy from the implementation of open banking. And it's even questionable if there is sufficient demand from financial institutions to support this regulation, especially last year during COVID, when what soared to the top of the priority list was digitizing all of their client services. And so banks were really focused on, especially traditional banks, making all of their features and services available in the mobile app, for example. And that took a lot of bandwidth. So this has likely been put on the back burner for some players and probably will be delayed because of mixed priorities. But also, what's even outside of COVID, what's important to understand is that there's a lot of challenges and alternative priorities that come up. So fintechs are, as opposed to getting access to data, they don't necessarily have the staff and the expertise to analyze all that data, and they're much more concerned with getting investment dollars and growing their user base. Banks themselves are investing in digitizing infrastructure, as I mentioned. And so it's just not clear to us when we actually speak to folks on the ground that this is a priority. And that puts into question whether it will really be implemented in the way that it was designed to be implemented. However, on the next slide, we can look at, there are some certain elements of open banking that we can see already are in high demand. So if we continue to fill up the slide, we can see that, first of all, banking as a service and fintech as a service, very similar, but they rely on integration among financial institutions, data sharing and capability sharing through APIs. And so on the one hand, we see the card networks being very open and making a lot of noise about how much they want to support the expansion of issuing through new partners. You can see some examples here from press releases, who some of their showcased partners are and how these programs work to develop more flexibility in issuing cards and integration with third parties to make this possible among a larger group of companies. And as you all know, almost every week we hear about a new fintech launching a new prepaid or a new debit card. So we have some of the older, the more known fintechs, as well as brand new fintechs coming on to offer either a digital account or, in most cases, an actual prepaid or debit card. So this continues to be in high demand and is probably the most tangible use case of open banking and data sharing that we'll see and continue to see. On the next slide, however, the regulatory environment to support this model is still very much in flux. Just recently, right at the end of the year in Mexico, we saw the key banking regulator crack down on fintech as a service model in which a third party is providing issuing capabilities in a white label type of scenario. So, they issued this announcement saying that this was no longer permitted. And so the entire fintech ecosystem in Mexico has been plunged into uncertainty. In Mexico, in Brazil and Argentina, we see this model very being enabled and very common. In other markets, it's still not, the infrastructure isn't quite there. And so if we go to the next slide, what we realize is that in order to continue building the infrastructure, payments infrastructure in Latin America, especially in countries outside of Brazil, we need more enablers. We need more issuers who are willing to provide BIN sponsorship. We need regulators and financial institutions to be working together and to provide more transparency on what regulators want to do and how financial institutions want to move, and pioneers to pave the way. In a lot of the smaller markets, we still haven't had this, a powerful issuer, a powerful fintech wanting to come and work with the card networks and make this happen in a lot of the smaller markets, which is holding back access and value being delivered to consumers. Okay. Great. And so finally, to wrap up our trends, before we get into our discussion, quickly, we're going to mention massive SME digitization, small and medium enterprises. This is perhaps the biggest outcome, the biggest impact that we saw with COVID-19, and I'm sure all of you are familiar and experienced it to some degree. So, SMEs have been perhaps the entity that are slowest to digitize, slowest to receive the value of electronic payments for many, many reasons. But of course, during the pandemic, during lockdowns, so many of them discovered the need to sell online for the first time ever. That created two things, right? First is opportunities for new ways for SMEs to collect payment through payment links, sales over social media, and kind of triggered an entire process of digitization of their sales channels, their finances, their business operations, etc. It also has accelerated ecosystems players' plans to become acquirers and small merchant service providers. So we see companies like Falabella, Magazine Luiza, who have already had this in their roadmap, serving small merchants, really accelerate their plans and prioritize their plans to be an ecosystem where small merchants can sell their products and get access to financial services. We see companies like Ualá in Argentina launching payment acceptance capabilities for the first time. And we're only at the beginning of this wave of transformation that we'll continue to monitor. And Nacho, I wanted to ask you, both from perspective of Argentina and more broadly, what do you see with relation to this trend?
Yes, I think that this trend is probably one of the most important in terms of economic impact, because as we have seen during the 2020 and 2019 as well, the effort on the fintech and the digital banking has been more on the consumers. In fact, in the most part of the countries of LatAm, at the beginning of the pandemic, we couldn't even see a full 100% virtual onboarding for the companies. So nowadays, I think that the door is open with this very, very fast digitalization of the SMEs. And the next step will probably be the invoice financing and different tools, digital tools to send financial services to the SMEs. Here in Argentina, we particularly see a boom of the e-check, which is the digital check for the checking accounts in the small and medium enterprise. And this is very interesting because you know that 2 weeks ago or 2 or 3 weeks ago, it has been 1 year since it launched. So we could see how helpful it was for the pandemic. Again, this is just one case in LATAM, but I think that the future of the economic impact of this digital financial revolution is gonna be in this trend for this 2021.
Absolutely. This is something that we'll be continuing to watch because it is so new and so much is to come of this. So thanks, Nacho. Okay, so thank you, everyone. I think we've covered our content. That was a whirlwind, I know. One last slide, my apologies. So, Nacho covered it pretty well. What we need in this realm is easy, cheap, and simple plug-and-play solutions so that merchants can manage their technology and their platforms on their own. So many of the solutions we see are still too heavy and too expensive for SMEs. Additional services that make selling online and selling digitally practical for small merchants, like returns, account reconciliation, etc. There's a lot to be done in this area, and a lot of room for creativity and experimentation. And again, we'll be watching it throughout the year. So I think that's my cue to go to the next section. There we go. All right, so our top predictions. I want to You can continue, Abel. There we go. The animations. There we go. So our top predictions. The point of this is to help orient us and understand what to expect and how to orient ourselves in 2021. So again, this is a bit of a recap, but debit will remain the number one payment method for everyone except the top 10% of consumers in 2021. And we expect credit to start to recover again towards the end of the year and in 2022. We also think that contactless will reach 25% of card volume, of in-person card volume by the end of 2021. Okay, that's up from an overall average right now of 5 to 10%. We see it really accelerated 25% by the end of the year. Pix will dominate. Pix in Brazil will dominate as a P2P payment method and a funding source for wallets. Which will then go on to fund card-based purchases. QR code will be adopted in certain niches, but we don't see it being dominant this year in 2021. What are the wallets and ecosystems players doing? Some of them are going to focus on shopping and commerce. We have already seen this with Banco Inter. We see this with Ame Digital, even PicPay, kind of going towards a shopping enablement model. Other ecosystem players, especially ones involved in acquiring, will really become front-end enablement payment players for small merchants and others, and will remain working on top of card rails. We don't see, again, the rise of closed-loop systems really making a dent in overall payment volume. And one really bright spot is retailers becoming increasingly marketplace spaces, even payment financial service providers for SMEs, which will help them gain traction and deepen their roots and gain market share, especially in markets like Chile, in Peru, in Colombia, where we don't yet have big tech or any big issuer filling this role quite yet. So those are just some of our thoughts. Love to hear your feedback and your comments about this. There's a lot of debate to be had, but that's what we're seeing at this point in the year. So we have just a few more minutes left, but we want to get to some of our audience questions. I want to take this time to remind you all that on February 22nd, we're launching our 2021 Coffee Chat program. Last year, we did an informal meeting in which we're all on camera. We all talk about different payment topics. It happens twice per month. So please scan the QR code to register. It's really fun, a good way to continue to talk about these trends, engage directly, ask questions, share your own perspective, do some networking. So we really encourage you to sign up. We'll have that up on the screen during our panel. And I'll ask Abel to, we have some prepared questions for the panelists and also start to take some audience questions before we wrap up.
All right, Lindsay, thank you so much. So let's get started here with some of our questions. One of them is from Marina, and it has to do with CaixaTem. It's basically asking her if she has any update on the behavior of the newly banked in Brazil, thanks to CaixaTem, or predictions as to how they're going to behave this year.
Okay, great, Abel, thank you. So the fact is everything is uncertain yet, right? What we saw happen is that Caixa chose to have two different calendars, one to disburse the funds to the beneficiaries, and another to allow them to withdraw and use cash. So this was a delay of 30 days, around 30 days for people to be able to withdraw the cash. So this made people start using all the alternative methods provided by CaixaTem app, such as use the virtual debit card, making transfers, paying service bills, and this increased a lot. If you see the numbers by the beginning of the payments, people were going to the ATMs and withdrawing cash 100%. After they decided to change the strategy, the disbursement strategy, it changed a lot. And most of the use, around 70 to 80%, was within the app. So this is a really change in behavior, especially because it's mostly the new banked population using, not being only included in the system, but also including the digital system, right? And what we expect is that this behavior will be like maintained. We, of course, nobody here is expecting that everyone will keep using as much as they use now, because once you're able to go back to the streets, to the stores and use cash, will be a catch up as well, of course. But we do not see the number of the usage of cash going back to the same level. Something we will see probably an increment in the use of the digital services. And what I think it's important to mention here, which is being really discussed, is what Caixa should do to keep these clients, right, within the app, using the app and all the services they develop to support during the lockdowns. And what we see is that mainly Caixa will need to educate the population, right? People need to be better served. They need to better understand the services and see the bank and the fintechs, all the institutions as partners and not as like the bad cops, not supporting and only charging interest. And one thing that is really interesting, and we are seeing a lot of videos and explanations in normal language, not only using banking language, financial services language, that support a lot the people to understand and to see they can rely on the explanation and really use what's being provided. And also the expansion of the services and products. For example, Caixa is evaluating to offer insurances and also health insurance and personal insurances, and also credit cards or other different loans for the population. So this is what we see here. It's still really embryonic. The government was paying the subsidies up to the beginning of the year. Let's see now really what's going to happen without the funds provided by the government.
All right, thank you. It's interesting to see that pattern playing itself out in Brazil. Now, in Argentina, however, it seems like cash is still stubbornly hanging on. So I wanted to ask Nacho about that. What's causing this reversal of digital payments and this increase of the use of cash in Argentina? And what would be needed to stop the trend and then to incentivize the digital payments?
Yes, thank you, Abel. And I think this is a fundamental aspect to consider, because during 2020, even with all the support of the digitization, the average consumer ticket dropped drastically for precautionary reasons. So at the top of the lockdowns, what we have seen, this is in Argentina and also in other markets of LatAm, for sure in Chile, Mexico, Uruguay, and Paraguay, which are countries that we have studied in depth last year. But what happened is that the people start to buy less and in merchants that are very close of their house. So with this change of pattern in their consumption, the cash was much more used than before. So as we all know, cash is king, but even more so in low volume transactions. The change in the consumption patterns generates a change in the default instrument use. In Argentina particularly, we have more problems, which is an economy which is suffering, that is suffering, is completely ill. So that plus the tax pressure on payments, on digital payment that we have seen during this last year, of course, are an incentive to use and to buy cash. I would like to be clear in this idea that there is not a silver bullet to all the countries. If you go case by case, you will find different reasons. In Argentina, I think that the most important right now is the tax pressure, and of course the macroeconomy that make people being spending as fast as they can and in a small amount. But in the different countries, we also have seen a rise on cash use, and we are waiting for the global 2020 cash usage indicators and surveys for this year.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Now we have another question here to field from Juan Carlos. He's basically asking this, Marina, I think may be good to address this one. His question is, have you seen increased level of fraud taking advantage of this faster payment environment that we're now in? This is one of the elements that he's pointing out as one of the most important ones to keep track of with this introduction and shift to digital payments. So what do you say about that, Marina?
Sure. Good question, Juan Carlos. This discussion is being more constant now because as we heard from some players here in Brazil, up to last year, all players were really worried to be part of BRICS and to comply with all the obligations and requirements. And now they are really starting to discuss about security and safety, how they could be better prepared to go against the frauds. What we have is like the PIX uses the same infrastructure of all electronic transactions in Brazil, right? It's part of the Sistema Financeiro Nacional, the national financial system, with all the same security. So because of that, what central bank says and all the players tend to agree is that considering the infrastructure, it is the same security that we have up to now. There is no additional risk on that. What we see really increasing, it's the phishing and the social engineering frauds, because since you have to register this chave, which is the key, the translation in English is key, the nickname for the banks, what we see is a lot of fraudsters sending fake links and websites to get the user information, and then they make their own register using someone's real data, and they deviate the funds to their account. So this is something that is happening, but as well pointed out by one of the people that is part of the safety group of central bank, is that this is something that is natural to the whole system. It's not something specific to PIX, because phishing happens, in all kind of electronic transactions, and this is not due to PIX. What happened is that, yes, due to something new, and PIX is something really that cause impacts, and everyone is trying to experiment. So what we saw here in real cases is the increase of fraudsters in this more in the social engineering aspect than the infrastructure of PIX. Because once it's done, as you said in your question, Juan Carlos, it's instantaneous and it's hard to revert the transaction. But what everyone is trying to do now, and a lot of companies providing security, and also the central bank and all the players together, how they can better solve and better act towards the social engineering and the phishing frauds that is happening.
All right, thank you so much, Marina. Well, we're kind of running short on time, so I want to talk a little bit about what we can offer to help people as well, and that may be related to some of the questions you'll have, as you'll see. So I wanted to turn the floor back over to Lindsay to talk a little bit about this, because these are important resources that we may be able to help you with.
Thanks, Abel, and thank you everyone for your questions. There are some more, and we'll stay on a little bit later, a little bit extra if you can hang in with us to answer some of those questions. But I didn't want to miss opportunity to share with you all. We come on and present this data to you because we're so excited about the trends that we see, and we want to provide value to you and help you with the decisions that you have to make. So the first thing we want to let you know about is the data that we manage internally. You'll receive a copy of this deck, but if you're interested in any hard data that we can process for you and provide you, this is just some examples of the information that we manage that we can provide you in a digestible, easy way, depending on the market that you need. Beyond data, we also at AMI, our key mission is to help companies make the most informed and strategic business decisions possible. We do that based on our own research, both desk research, scanning public information, and more importantly, interviews that we hold with every type of player in the industry. As you guys know, we're well connected. We see things from a 360-degree angle, so we can help you make the key decisions that you need to make. And some of the common types of projects and engagements we do with clients are here on the left, whether it's market landscaping and mapping, so you can see how this actually, this crazy ecosystem looks, from doing a regulatory risk analysis, thought leadership, serving consumers and merchants, looking at your competitors. All of these components we can help you with so that you can really make the most strategic and intelligent decisions possible. That's what we live for. That's what we're here for. So to make it really easy, I want to launch this poll right now. I would love to gift, 30-minute consultation to anyone who's interested. We can talk about any of the trends, and you can take advantage of the time to learn more about any of the trends or pick our brains a little bit more. We can talk about any of these services, how we think AMI can support you. If you have questions about the data or any of the ways we can engage with you, just click yes. We'll reach out to you. You'll have a free 30-minute consultation with myself or one of my team members. Let us know. Maybe if you're not ready, not now, but maybe later, we'll keep you on the back burner for a later time. And if you're not interested right now, not a problem. You'll still receive the deck and the recording. So we'll just give you another moment to respond. And if you can hang on, we're over time, but for those of you who want to hang around, we'll continue to answer some questions as long as we still have an audience with us. So again, thank you for being here. Just take a moment to, almost everyone has voted. Let's just take about 10 more seconds. Make sure you get your vote in. And then we'll follow up accordingly after the session. All right. Thanks for that, everyone. So we want to officially put an end to this in case you have to go. We know we're about 5 minutes over time. So thank you so much for being with us, but we will stay on to answer some additional questions if folks want to hang in there. So I'll turn it back to Abel.
All right. Thank you, Lindsay.
Abel, if you could go back a slide too, that way they can see our contact information.
Sure.
There we go.
No problem. Well, we do have a question here from Grace, and it has to do with this. How do you see the payment processing sector accommodating those who are still unbanked?
Yeah, good question, Grace. Well, you know, they have done a lot. They have done some good work, essentially making opening an account as easy as possible, removing all of the barriers that people might face. Number one, having to go to a branch, making it possible to open an account in seconds on your mobile phone by uploading your ID and a selfie and maybe a proof of address, but something very simple. So in that sense, in most markets, there really are no more barriers to opening an account and having access to your basic financial services. They've done fintechs and banks together have done a very good job of this. Where we're still lacking is, how do we escort these new unbanked folks up through the ladder and through the journey to make them have a more engaged relationship over time? And that's where we're still seeing the lag.
All right, thank you. There's another interesting question here that I'd like to run by Ignacio, and this was from Carlos, and he's asking, what are your predictions around rewards with banks and different payment methods?
Yes, Carlos is a very, very interesting question, because what we have seen also during 2020 is that this scheme, that the most part of the wallet, fintech, non-bank wallet, but just the fintech, they were a little bit in a problem, because they were not earning money and they had to start to stop this policy of just growing and earning clients. So what we are watching this first part of the year is that banks and fintech, they are fighting with discounts. And this is a very, very useful tool for the consumer, for all us consumer, but for the ecosystem, that's a very bad news for the small wallets and the small providers, because what will happen, that we will see players as Mercado Pago or PayPal, for example, in Mexico, or other huge players which can bring huge discounts, fighting for the customers with the same economic power than the banks. So the other part of the ecosystem will have more difficulty in this 2021 in terms of earning clients. So what I see for this year is that there will be a very tough fight on discounts in terms to earn clients after the massive access in this digital financial inclusion process that the COVID brought to Latin America.
All right, thank you very much. We have another question here from Raul, which is a little different. He's asking about international players. How about the international players that may be from Europe or the United States that might want to get into the LatAm market? He's asking if we see any advantages or disadvantages for them, considering that there's already some players that are already very well ensconced, like Nubank and Rappi. So what those possibilities, how would you address that?
Hi, Raul. Good to see you here. It's a really good question. Particularly in Brazil, you have to know, this is a refrain that is so common and so true, that you really have to know the local market to be successful, particularly in Brazil and Mexico, where you have expert companies who really specialize only in that market. In Brazil, there are so many big companies that only are in Brazil, and even banks. There are few international banks, but they tend to be kind of historical big players that know that market extremely well. So it is difficult for a international player to come in. Where we're seeing this with, N26, for example, Revolut coming to Latin America, Be Next coming to Mexico. But so we haven't seen evidence yet that these players will be successful. More so, I would say there is opportunity on the acquiring side. We're seeing better results from companies like Stripe, big global players like Adyen, Worldline, even Checkout coming in. And because there's more of a lacking of high quality service on the acquiring side than on the consumer facing side, I would say that's where I see more opportunity. Marina, I'm not sure if you have any comment there. A lot is happening in Brazil, so you might have an insight.
Yeah, no, but I totally agree with you, Lindsay. I think that we really have a lot of players now. And in my opinion, for the new players to come in, they need to figure out how to add value and how to be different, because I guess that's the race in which almost all the players that are already established are trying to run, because everyone now is trying to provide more personalized solutions to get to know your clients and to provide a full online offering. Because the basic almost everyone has, and that's something really interesting that we discussed in one of our coffee chats last year, is that the new banks now are trying to convert into really banks, meaning that they are really trying to have the full offering, because they started in one specific niche, and now they are trying to gain traction and gain more clients. And this is basically they have to have offers to all kind of clients. So this is the only thing to add, that who wants to come in needs to try to find where they can add value and bring some different strategy that they are using in Europe or US, I don't know where, but trying to become a different player, to innovate, right? And it's quite complex because everyone is trying to do the same thing now.
I would like to add just one point in this question, because it is really interesting, and of course we have seen a lot of examples during the last months. For example, N26, N26 in Brazil, among others. So what we can say is that 2019 was the year of the investment in Argentina, and in LatAm. 2020 and probably 2021 are gonna be the years in which this huge fintechs comes to the region. And what we have to have in mind is that these models need to be profitable. So we have spoken about this in the trends of open banking and also in another ones, but just the biggest actors can be profitable with a free service to the customers. So the race is to be this kind of super app in LatAm. And in that race, we have some players which by far has a better position to compete than others. So Rappi, of course, Mercado Libre, of course, this European wallet, they can do that, but not the most part of the ecosystem in Argentina. That's why they start an acquiring service, or they open their service because they need to be profitable, and the cut of the investment on 2020 will be probably a problem that they need to solve in this 2021. So the trend is to the concentration in the market, or to transform themselves into a provider in, I don't know, maybe a fintech as a service model, or in an open banking ecosystem, to see how can they play.
All right, thank you. We have another question from Patricio that sort of has a compare contrast component. This is something maybe Marina can step in and take on. If the question is, what makes Pix different and successful as opposed to Cody, which is also an instant payment scheme with the QR app backed by the Central Bank of Mexico?
Yeah, I can start, and probably Lindsay can help us here to reply, but everyone is asking this to us since we started presenting Pix. And what we see is basically that central bank here in Brazil is really putting efforts to develop Pix. They are the owner, the manager, the controller, everything. They are responsible for the PIX system, the infrastructure, and all the regulatory aspects as a whole. And they are the ones, I mean, they selected some companies that should participate, they must participate, in fact, that are obliged to, and the others are optional. So this brought most of the biggest players to PIX. They had to adopt it. So this made PIX adoption among the players something that they must have. Either you are part of PIX or you're out of the game. So this supported a lot. And because of that, all the consumers, the individuals here in Brazil were made available, and they get to know PIX because it was a lot of big banks with a lot of different kind of clients and also institutions speaking about PIX and also highlighting and showcasing their own experience, right? So people who are also here in Brazil were really willing to test something new, to have a better experience. And you know that Brazilians were one step ahead of the region, let's say, to adopt different digitizations. And that's why the neobanks grew so fast here, because the population was ready for that. People were willing to spend less, to pay less taxes and fees for the traditional banks, and neobanks came opening a total new window with a better experience and a better cost. And PIX was part of that. You know, we were in the trend to get new payment methods, and this supported PIX. In Mexico, Cody, what I know, it is from Central Bank as well, but it's not that, how can I say, it's not the same way. Mexicans are not that willing to use it, neither the individuals nor the banks and the institutions. It's something that didn't have the same adoption. You know, Lindsay, do you have any more insights on Cody too?
Yes, thanks, Marina. Mexico, I laugh with another consultant colleague because, you know, she likes to say that the Central Bank of Mexico is the worst marketer on the planet. Mexico has had real-time payment infrastructure far before the rest of the region. One of the first real-time, you know, with SPAY and what the central bank has done, of the first in the world to have a really seamless payment platform, but they have not successfully marketed it both to banks and to consumers. And what we saw in Brazil that has helped for PIX to take off, as you guys on one of the slides, we showed all of the marketing that individual banks have put out there. Some of them branded PIX, you know, made up their own kind of PIX brand, but they really pushed PIX out to the population. And if you don't have issuer bank engagement, for as much as Latin Americans dislike banks, they still look to them and trust them to a certain degree. And so if the traditional banks are not celebrating and pushing this central bank platform, the population is not likely to even know about it. And so in Mexico, there hasn't been that same pressure that we saw in Brazil, where either you're with PIX or you're out. We haven't seen that same type of pressure happening in Mexico. So, you know, it's a question mark. Why is that the case? You know, banks haven't been as ready to, because they're all in competition, they haven't been wanting to come together to build this ecosystem in the same way. Now, Cody is growing month over month, but nothing compared to what we've seen in Brazil.
That's very interesting. Marketing does make a big difference. Maybe that's why I'm in favor of it, because I do it. At any event, let's move on to a crystal ball kind of question that comes from Diana. This is kind of challenging for you folks. I'd like to see what you say about this. She wants to know, how fast will cash lose share within the payment mix in Latin America? Sort of a time frame.
Right, Diana, thank you for the question. If we knew the answer to this,
we'd retire.
Right, exactly. Look, we saw cash lose a little bit of share in 2020. It has the potential to lose a lot more this year, but I wouldn't say more than 5% in the year. You know, right now the challenge is for fintechs and banks to make that payment experience worth the effort it takes to change a habit. We all know that our habits are deeply ingrained. So the experience needs to be 10 times better for you to make the shift. And so for a lot of segments of the population, the social benefit incentive was strong enough to get them into the system. Is it strong enough to keep them there and to encourage them to use that payment for different use cases is still a question mark. And so that's the big challenge that's facing everyone. I was going to say something else and it went out of my mind, but just considering banks and fintechs need to ask themselves, why would someone, I like to say that cash in the retail space, cash is the ultimate interoperable payment method because everyone has it and everyone accepts it. So you have to make sure that what you're offering exceeds that experience, surpasses that experience. In e-commerce, cash is much more difficult to use. And so that is the place to start. And the more that e-commerce blends into the physical world, you'll start to see that the value of cash erode. But it's still an uphill battle and a slow process. I can see Nacho nodding. I don't know if you have anything else to add.
No, I was just thinking that, yes, we should have the crystal ball in order to answer that question. But maybe an optimistic add-on of what you have said, Lindsay, and this is a multidimensional phenomenon, is that all the predictions around the cash decline in the market have failed in the past. So we can be optimistic in the future that even when you see that some banks are thinking that's 5% decline, for example, the central bank in Argentina, later on, they said 10% in 5 years or whatever, and you will read a lot of those predictions. The truth is that every year they fail, and the cash the reduction has been bigger of the prediction. So we should, and I think we must be optimistic in that phenomenon.
All right, so let's switch gears for a more specific question. This is from an anonymous attendee. This we also want to direct towards Nacho, and the question is: How do you think fintech versus commercial banking services view the idea of financial inclusion, and what does this mean for the future?
Oh, this is a question that I love because I really like the financial inclusion topic. Just let me say two things. First one is that the fintech revolution has raised the flag of the financial inclusion, but the truth is that, as far as we know, on the last year they have fight for the same client in the bank. So not the non-banked, but the underbanked people. What has happened in the world this year? Because this is a new information that the World Bank has shown on 30 December, the last December, is that the financial inclusion scope has changed in the world. It has changed. So we're not thinking about giving only access or usage of the financial services, but to promote the resilience, the financial resilience of the customers. And I think that will be on the pipelines in the banking sector and in the fintech sector, because looking for financial inclusion like an utopic idea that will, eliminate the poverty and the inequality has shown that's not true, and that's impossible. So now the financial mainstream organizations are changing their discourse, and they are saying we are not going to eliminate the poverty and change the world and whatever we just give tools for be more resilient to the shocks. And that, in my opinion, is a much more honest point of view. And I think that the banks and fintech will take it by far because it is much more comfortable way or field to play.
All right.
I love that response, Nacho, and I totally agree. I think that there has been, I don't think that, of course it varies from bank to bank, but on the overall, banks have not really been interested in true financial inclusion. They want to expand the use of digital payments among their current client base. They want to bank people who are bankable, but for whatever reason haven't entered the system yet. But there is still the question mark. Are people who have been traditionally excluded from the system, are they profitable? Can we make money off of these people? That's the question that is the big question mark still. And as long as the answer is no, or as long as the answer is I don't know, then banks aren't going to be truly incentivized to work with them. That's not saying anything. That's not a criticism or a judgment at all. It's simply, that's the way of business. And so whoever can unlock this question of how do I add value and receive value, how do I create this cycle of value for the customer and the institution, until that question is answered, financial inclusion will always be kind of this enigma thing that everyone's chasing, but nobody really wants to capture.
So agree with that idea, Lindsay. Very agree.
No, an eternal conflict. Well, we've kind of run over significantly, almost a half hour. So I think we're going to have to close up shop here for today's event. We want to thank you for all the questions. We think they're great, and we can continue the whole idea of answering your questions. Actually, there's a couple of ways to do it. If you see there with the QR code, we have our coffee chat, and we'll send the link to that coffee chat registration form along with the rest of our materials when we send that out to you. That's an event coming up on February 22nd, and we talk about different topics. So at that point, you can actually, if we didn't answer your question today, by all means attend and fire away. You can also email our panelists to hear their information there. And then another way to get an answer to that question or other ones is to take advantage of that 30-minute consultation. If you shoot an email over to Lindsay, I'm sure that you'll be able to schedule one with no problem. So thank you so much for coming out today. We hope you have a wonderful day and hope to see you soon at our next event.